without much further ado, help me get a warm round of applause for Tim Kang.
Thanks, Ted. If you don't know me, my background, I always list that I am husband first and a father first because relationships are important to me, and those are the most important relationships in my life. I'm also a cinematographer. I went to AFI, studied cinematography there. I shot movies and documentaries and crewed as a DIT, as a gaffer, as a key grip, and everything in between. At first AC, pulled focus on film and learned how to judge distances by eye. Can you believe it or not? I'm here at Aperture now. I've been here for about half a year. I also started the lighting committee for the tech council at the ASC, so I'm an associate member of the ASC. And I'm also extremely proud of being an IATSE member. I got inducted into 728 last quarter, and it's one of the most proudest moments I ever experienced in my career. So my question to you is, who are you? Now, I know there's a couple of my peers, so AFI folks, can you give me a shout or a cheer? Right on. But just to raise your hands, how many gaffers do I have in here? Just be bold and be proud. Thank you. 728 members. Yes. All right. Woo. 600 members. All right. Awesome. Great. DPs, just in general. All right. Owner-operators of gear. Yes. Okay. Indie filmmakers in general, just yes. All right. So that's not okay. That's the crowd here. All right. So what I wanted to do was begin with this fellow. I'm starting with this painting, this self-portrait, because anytime you had craft and you had art of any subject matter you can think of, all the developments have gone from being literal to abstracted, right? And I think one of the best examples of this was the phenomenon of Impressionism, right? So in the late 1800s, there was a movement in Europe. This movement took this ideal from the Renaissance that painting had to be renderings of real life as close as possible, right? They went from that to the idea that what matters is more that you get the impression of reality, right? And so Paul Cézanne is one of the great French impressionists, had this quote that everything in nature is formed upon the sphere, the cone, and the cylinder. So if you learn how to paint a cone, a sphere, and a cylinder in any lighting scenario, in any environment, you can start constructing anything in the natural world, right? So what I'm asking for you today, as a fellow practitioner of the craft, of lighting and of filmmaking and of image creation, is that you could leave this place with a transformed perspective. So what I mean by that is we've been staring at a square for the last 100 years. And all I'm asking for us is to kind of shift our minds to realize that the square is really a cube and it's got facets. And there's different ways to actually think about the thing that we do, right? So, and another way to unpack this is that instead of just thinking in terms of literal fixtures, right? Instead of just, this light does that thing, I want us to think more conceptually. I want a point of light, I want a line of light, I want a triangle light, whatever, a 2D or a 3D cylinder, right? I know that we've done this, we've been using this, but I'm just trying to formalize this, right? So that we can go away from just saying, I need this type of fixture to going to, I need to create this environment of lighting, right? Now, you've already, again, been doing this, maybe inherently. This lecture right now is to make it more formal, right? So I want to start with line of environmental lighting elements. This is a point, essentially. I know it's a little square, it's a little rectangle rather, but from far away enough, this is a point, right? I'm going to graduate to a line. We have lines of different sizes. And then we're going to go to a 2D shape, which is this star right here. And then we're going to go from a 2D shape, and here we've got a bunch of infinibars constructed into a window here. And this window could be horizontal or vertical. And I basically have them bouncing into a cove of show card. So again, nothing here is scary or difficult to do, and it is definitely approachable, but it is novel in that the infinibars can do this, right? So it's not, again, just about these fixtures. The idea is I'm trying to get into the 4 C's of the dimensions of these elements, right? I'm trying to abstract that you have a 3D, 2D, or 1D point, and that 1D, 3D, or 2D point, or whatever dimension it is, has a certain effect on your subject. And that subject, instead of thinking in terms of key fill and backlight, I want us to think in terms of what is the light actually doing with the subject. So I want to think in terms of dimensions of contour. What is the shape of the subject, and how does that shape of the subject reveal the character, reveal the moment, and then how does contrast change the mood and feeling of that shape? Then we talk about context, right? Where is that character in its context? And then finally, the dimension of color, which enhances all three of these, and it makes it a four-dimensional way of thinking, right? So let's talk about contour first. I'm going to go to this program called Assimilate Live Effects, and I've got my whole lighting set up here. As you can see, this is my stars. If I take it off here, some of these lights turn off, right? And I took it back. They go back on. And basically, this is a Photoshop style interface that I can use to control my lights, right? So I'm going to turn this star off. I'm going to go to one of my point sources, okay? This is an MC Pro, right? And we've got, they're magnetized, so I've just got a strip of these here that I can grab from. Effectively, this is a point of light, right? And this point of light is going to be the only light playing now. So if we can kill the CS15 outside, and I'm going to just turn off all my lights here. So I've got a 5-foot bend that I'm going to turn off here. And I've got my window cove that I'm going to also turn off so that the only light playing is this guy, right? And you can see that on my interface that it's this bunch of lights here are my NC Pros, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about position first. Right now, I'm going to try to keep an equal distance around my talent. And as you can see, as I go around, this single point of light is creating a contour, right? So it doesn't matter what I'm using. If I just have a single element, in this case, this is a point, it's a contour. So if I'm right here, can you turn on the stage CS15? Okay, and I'll remove that. It's a similar sort of quality light, but from further away, right? Now, if I decide to keep this, we traditionally call this a backlight, right? But instead, what I'm thinking about is more that this sort of contour is just more about the outline of her shape, right? So if I keep that, right, then what I can do is talk about the distance. So if I get this light again, and I'm going to line it up. So I'm going to get to the same point of line right here. Can you turn off the backlight? Right? So basically the fall off is going to change, right? So this feels like the light is physically there because it drops dramatically. Now, can you fade up slowly? Now, this feels a little bit more naturalistic as a source because it's further away. Can you switch between the stage unit to the exterior unit and turn off the stage unit, please? Distance has changed, right? And can you A/B between the two units? So this is a little bit hotter, but the reason why I'm doing this is that fall off is more about the distance of the photons reaching the subject. So in this case, if you don't have the space to put the light that far out, you can still get a point source unit, whether it's, this is not going to have the throw, but in this case, this is also a point source unit. The COB and the exit optic, it's about the same size as this, actually. So you're still going to get that same hard quality of light from further away. And since it's about what I would say like a 20-foot run, and then that's about a 15-foot run within a smaller amount of space, this could have been inside a living room, we've got a 35-foot run. So that's the dimension of distance. Now, the final dimension here, we're going to now look at the quality of light that comes from the size. This goes from a 2-inch width unit to a 1-foot unit. So already if I A/B it, so it's a little harder and it's starting to get a little bit softer. You see that shadow is starting to get fuzzier. And then I'm going to go to a 2-footer. It's getting even softer. And then going to a 4-footer, right? And that's the softest out of all of them, right? So really the dimension of the quality light we always talk about. We use these terms of quality of light. I just like to say the relative size relative to the person. So a 4-footer up close is going to be a pretty big thing. But if I put this 4-footer against that wall, let's say this could have the output, it would be a hard light from that far away, right? So it's about the relative size to the subject. So if I then took this unit here, this 4-footer, and I bolted on a 1-foot unit around it, right? So that's this guy right here that I'm dragging around. So now what I can do is I can grab it around and wrap it around. So if I touch the 1-foot unit, if I add that in, it adds more wrap, and it's basically becoming a 5-foot light that wraps around the face, right? So that's basically a soft light because now we've got more angle going around the person. It's the relative size, okay? With the dimension of contrast now is instead of just talking about fill light, well, what are you doing with the fill light is that you're changing the difference between light and dark. The difference between here and this side of the face is pretty drastic, right? I would say it's probably at least 128 times the amount of light coming from this side. So if I then turn on this bent 4-foot light, right? So it kind of wraps around her face. What I can do is create a dimensionless fill. All it's going to do is modulate that contrast. So if I go to the mixer here, and I'm going to go back to 0 and just slowly dim up. If I go all the way up, yeah, the exposure is bright. We can bring the exposure down. It just looks like a really big dimensionless light. And I'm going to bring that down. It doesn't really change the quality of light in the face. It's just changing the contrast. It's just changing the difference between the brightest part of her face and the dark part of her face, right? So this dimension of contrast, the difference between light and dark, is what changes the mood, right? It changes the mood of the contour and what it does to your talent, right? The third C is context. So if I now create a window light, so what I've done here with this unit called my Cove light that we've talked about earlier, and if you look at the interface here, I'm going to drag it around, okay? Maybe I want a horizontal window. This is now providing the environment. I actually am inside a room, right? And the reason why I did this is that if I had direct reflections, right? So if you take a look at my glasses here, if I pan it in and out, it doesn't just look like an interview light or movie light anymore. Now it just reads as a window, right? Because I've got this hash marks that psychologically we think of as a window. What I'm trying to do is thinking, how do I create context here, right? How do I create a relationship between the character and their environment, right? So this is expanding not just the idea of separation from the background, which is why we have traditionally used backlights, rim lights, kickers, you name it. Now, if you think about what they do, it's not just about separation, it's about relationship. And you're just defining that relationship. That's what the dimension of context is. Now, the final dimension of color is a really interesting one. So I'm going to take a pause here. We're not going to barrel all the way through to everything until I have to get to a common understanding of what I mean by color, right? This is color for camera, not just color for our eyes. Now, when we've been doing color and talking about color and controlling color on set, whether it's CC filters on camera, which nobody uses anymore, whether it's plus and minus green gels, we had these dimensions of cold and warm or blue and orange, and that was our CCT, right? And if you're experienced, you also know, oh, wait, that's not the only dimension. There's also green and magenta, right? And there's all these different versions of it. So that's what we consider as white light variations. We also had saturated color defined by just our grade school understanding of red, orange, green, yellow, blue, or you start associating trade names of products, whether they're paint chips, Crayola, or gels. Sarar Yellow is a trade name, right? You have all these codes, right? Well, essentially, we are just thinking in terms of saturated colors. So I want us to rethink that too. When I want to define the color of one of my elements in my environment, I have to understand what it actually is. And what it actually is energy. Light is energy, right? And that energy has a fingerprint, and we call that a spectrum fingerprint. Since it's radiating out, we call it radiometry. So I'm going to talk about radiometry. Now, when you have white light, this series of spectrum that you see there are essentially the standard series of spectrum that all white light is supposed to be, right? From 2000 Kelvin to 10,000 Kelvin and beyond. As you notice, on the warmer color temperatures, it's very smooth, but since you can't really get a black body light that's at 5,000 Kelvin or above, we refer to the sun. So this is the spectrum of the sun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on this one light that I've turned into a pixel. So this is a white light. And I'm going to pan this out right here. You can see that this is a white light. And I'm going to turn on my meter. And what I've done is I've made an RGB pixel. So if I turn off this white pixel right here, I've got sampled full red, full green, full blue. Essentially, this is a single pixel, right? So if I meter this, it's basically daylight. There you go. 56 with just the right amount of green, because that's what's in real life. And that's the spectrum. Super spiky. When I then turn on the white light diodes with the right amount of mix, I'm going to meter this again. So I'm getting basically 5600 Kelvin with just a slight amount of green in there. It's like, I would say, a 16th green. So when you look at it and you see the effect of it, we can't tell with our eyes because our eyes throw that information away. But we can tell by the impact it has on physical objects. So if I light our talent here, when I go to 56, you'll see a difference appear. Now, the gray card shows that the white balance is not that drastic enough to account for all these color shifts going on, not just with the skin tone, which kind of goes magenta and gray. This is RGB, spiky spectrum, and this is full spectrum. When we talk about color, we haven't had to do this before. We need to define what the spectrum is. Or we need to know, basically, that we've got something that is the inherent identity of that light. So it's the same thing of if you were to make creme brulee and you had sugar or Splenda. Splenda is not going to melt and turn to that wonderful caramel crust that you crack like an omelet, right? You need to use the real chemical structure to make that caramel become a hard shell. So in like kind, there is an identity to your light that you may not be able to see unless you have one of these. Now, there's also a $10 spectrometer that you can just buy just so you look at the light and see, does it have a lot of spikes or is it smooth? So that's the first dimension of color that I want us to rethink. I shot this, as you can see in the date, 5 years ago. And I've shot it with every single camera. I've shot it so many times. I've done this talk so many times of just this subject matter. So if you can see here, if I talk between full spectrum and narrow spectrum, there is a very obvious difference. And the final obvious difference is if you go to an LED volume, you try to light with an LED wall, this is the spectrum of an LED wall. So if you try to use an LED wall as your light source, you're going to get these kind of results, not necessarily these kind of results. Is that a problem? It could be. It could not be. It depends. It's more about what do you want to do, and do your tools actually do what you want to do, right? That's called specificity. That's the topic of spectrum. If we talk about colorimetry, that's just the measurement of color. All our units have a full range of RGB. You can see it pretty much encompasses a very large region of the full possible range or gamut of possible colors that our human eyes can see. Now that we know that we have control over spectrum, and we also have control over all the different ways that you can perceive that spectrum, now you understand that every single ingredient that you have can enhance or change the contrast. It could change the contour, and it could change your sense of context because you need to use color in your lighting, right? I went into this whole thing because I'm trying to get us into the world of environmental lighting. Now, I learned this personally just from doing it. I shot docs, I shot interviews. I remember one year I shot 200 interviews in a year, 150 interviews in a year all around the country for different projects. And in that process of doing that, this feature documentary that I was working on wanted naturalistic light. They wanted to just only shoot with available light, which is really hard. I had to go to all these locations and just start figuring out how do I get consistent light during the course of the interview, but also understand what is it that makes that light that light? Why does it have that quality of light? And again, that's where the whole thinking of Cezanne and Impressionism came about. So let's take a trip. We've normally thought of motivated light in many ways as gags. In this case, this is a TV gag. Poorman's process is basically creating an environment to make it seem like you're driving in a car. Fire gag is basically saying I'm being lit with fire using elements to trick the eye that we are lighting with fire. Now, the fire gag evolved as an example. If you look at this slide, this is still a fire gag, but it's not just a fire gag anymore. Mr. Deakins created an environment of fire. And why did he do this? What movie was this for? 1917, right? This is the burning church, and that's what was actually shot on the left, and with VFX comping, that's what you get on the right? So he didn't just want to do a static fire gag. He wanted to make it really seem like it was the environment, right? But that's still sort of a gag. And we've seen virtual production explode over the years, and it's happened over the course of the last 15, 20 years, I would say, where if I shoot with cars, I might start trying to shoot cars with video screens. This idea evolved because I would say 20 years ago, if I wanted to make a 3D computer-generated polygon shell of an object, that's what all 3D imagery is. How do you make that polygon into a realistic looking thing? Well, if you light it a certain way, you take a photo of a real environment, you get a sphere around it, and you map that photo onto that virtual sphere around the thing that you're modeling. Now that model has an environment of reflection, and if you start tying lighting data to that environment, you can now light that subject as if it was in that environment itself, okay? So where I want us to learn from all this is, one, this is not a new idea. You've been doing this for 100 years. You've been doing this in a billion different ways. We've gotten to a point with technology. We've gotten to a point to craft. We've gotten to a point into philosophy. Environmental light is basically windows to the world. We don't need to have the literal world light. We just need to create the impression of that world. We can do wonderful things. This is a gray card, okay? The only two things I have are this star of light. I'm moving around here. And I've got this window light. Now, right now, it's turned around, right? So all I need to do is, okay, I go to fixture, and I go to the orientation of it, and I go to 0 degrees. And now I've got a horizontal light. So now what I can do is, instead of doing a flat white image to be my light source, I can light with Cezanne. Here's one of his paintings, right? We have the choice of what we want to be our light source. Do I want the ground to be my light source? Well, then I'll just drag my star to sample the ground, right? If I want that to be a sky, I'll drag this over to my sky. Well, I want a different painting. So I could turn it off. I've got another painting, right? And another painting. Or instead, I could have a video plate, a 360-degree IBL video plate shot by Alex Pierce, who's in the audience. You don't have to do this, but when you do this, then what you can do is you can literally dial in the world. So if you look at the environment here, you can see this is a 360-degree plate being mapped. It doesn't even have to be perfect. You see that seam. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Because it's just light, right? So if I want to look at the sunset here, and I go to stage lights, I want, let's say, this star to be my sunset skylight, and I want my window to actually be a window to that environment, that sunset. Well, now I've got a warmer view of the sunset. So as you can see, that this is not just a static, boring lighting setup. If I start shadowing and moving past it, it starts to feel more naturalistic. Because I'm literally just lighting with what I would normally light with an available light source. This is not just a tech demo. We don't make this software. This is a professional software and this is what we call a media server, right? And this media server, essentially, it could hook up to any console that is readily used in the film business. Ben Dynas is our lighting programmer and also our head of UI and user experience. He's using a Hog 4 console. There's GrandMA, there's ETC EOS. This has all the hooks and profiles so that you can control this with the console. If I can control this with the console, this becomes a professional product, right? Because that's what the professionals use, right? So here's the other thing. Is this playback? Well, yeah, this is playback, but it could be that the lighting programmer doesn't have to play back. They just have to control, right? So this is also a solution as a professional for media, for union jurisdiction, and also just common sense. If I'm a projectionist and I've got a rear screen projection or whatever the case, the union playback person can play back whatever they want and control the playback and do all that. And that's great because they got to focus. That's a complicated thing. It's hard to do. You have to know the codecs. You have to have all the hardware. You need all the right gear. You need to have the expertise. You need to know video signals, etc. That's why the union exists, right? And why the position exists and why it's an important job, right? But they don't want to deal with lighting. They don't understand, and they don't want to understand, have to understand how to use that window light to be a person's, exterior, right? So what a program like this could do is it just takes the video feed in, and that's what this can do. I mean, if I even just use my webcam here, and I can turn everything off here, right? I'm blurry, but now you can see I'm being mapped. So if I'm here, this could be a video feed coming in from the world, and if I just wave my hand here, you can see that it's playing out on the fixture, right? What I did here, this act, is what the lighting program will do with the playback source coming from the playback department, and they're just simply mapping and controlling the color data to be correct for the fixtures. There are many ways to skin the cat. You don't have to use this program necessarily. I mean, even consoles can take video files anyway. They've been doing it for 20 years, right? You could even, if you don't have access to all this, but you have a lighting programmer on your shoot, you could even start pixel mapping right away with our fixtures because Ben and I have been working really hard together to create video fluency with the signal so that the signal that you're seeing, this is a Rec 709 broadcast video signal, and it's just color data. It's just language. It doesn't have to do anything with spectrum. It's just simply a perceived language of color, and all video is based off of this same language. And all I need to do is make sure this understands it. And if this understands it, then this could unpack that video data into lighting data. So that's the work that I've been doing for the past couple of years, and that's what we're working hard at Aperture with, so that this simply just becomes a matter of as simple as lighting with images and an idea you have in your head. So long story short, environmental lighting is not just a party trick. Environmental lighting is basically a philosophy. You could use these advanced technical methods. You could just do it literally with as many fixtures that you like. The idea is simply think about the lighting environment, think about the contour it creates, your element creates, think about the contrast that it creates, think about the context that it reveals about your subject, and ultimately you can use color to enhance all these variables. So that's environmental lighting. If you have any other questions, you're always welcome to email me or contact me, and I can nerd out with you. More than happy to do so. So that's my, that's not TED Talk, because TED is sitting over there. That's my Aperture Talk? Flex Talk? No, thank you.